The show starts in 3, 2, 1, go.
Good morning, CaneSport. It's the 28th of January, 2025. I'm Gary Ferman, the publisher of CaneSport.com, joined once again this morning by our managing editor, Matt Shodell, as we discuss the news of the day. And a big one it is, as last night in the 9 o'clock hour, the ACC released the football schedule for the Miami Hurricanes for 2025, a season where a lot of people expect Miami to be a contender in the ACC and again on the national scene because of the pickups that the Canes have made in the transfer portal. But ironically, the road is going to be considerably tougher this next season than it was in the last season, when we all know what happened and Miami faded down the stretch. So, Matt, let me start, by just talking about the dates on the schedule. We'll set the scene, and then I want to talk about, obviously, a lot of these games. Miami will open at home on the 31st of August against the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame, a Sunday night game that will obviously be a huge spectacle on the national stage. Could see game day in Miami that weekend. Would not be shocked. They had a great visit to Miami back in 2017, and I know they've been dying to get back here, and they love that setting on campus with the lake and everything. So I wouldn't be shocked if we see game day that weekend, and it's going to be a huge game on the college football stage for sure. Then the next week on Saturday, the Canes will play Bethune-Cookman, the annual mail-it-in game that I can't stand. I wish that they would stop playing Bethune-Cookman and FAMU. I just don't see where the benefit is. The following week, a more representative game against South Florida at home. And then on September the 20th, the Florida Gators will come to town with DJ Lagway, another game that figures to be a huge, huge game in college football next year, particularly if Miami is able to beat Notre Dame and Florida is able to get through the early part of its schedule unscathed. I haven't looked at the Gator schedule. I can't tell you who they play, but if both teams are undefeated, I would think that would be a big national game as well. Maybe another one that might lure game day. You never know. Most years we don't have games that would lure game day. This year we have a couple of them that could be pretty interesting. Then the schedule gets weird, okay? On September the 27th, there's a bye week. And then October 4th, Miami goes to Florida State, Doak Campbell Stadium. They're already gouging the hotels for those of you that like to make that trip. So just start throwing pennies in your piggy bank for that one, because the hotels in Tallahassee are going to be as ridiculous as usual. And then it's weird. Then there's another bye week. So they have 2 bye weeks in 3 weeks. Very quirky schedule in that regard. October 11th is a bye also. And then on Friday night, the 17th, which is part of the reason why they probably put those bye weeks in, Miami has been scheduled to play Louisville at home on Friday night. So that'll be October 17th. And then October the 25th, the Canes host Stanford. And then the month of November, weekly games, one every week. On November 1st, they're at SMU. November 8th, they host Syracuse. November 15th, they host NC State. November 22nd, at Virginia Tech. Potential cool weather there. And then, of course, the ACC loves to schedule when Miami goes to Pittsburgh. It's always got to be Thanksgiving weekend when it might be, potentially even snowing. They got to give Miami that cold weather date in the last game of the year, November 29th at Pittsburgh. So, Matt, before we dive into some of these individually, in total, and no surprise, we've been talking about it, a considerably tougher path for the Miami Hurricanes in 2025. The race is on for Mario Cristobal to build a roster that will be capable of handling that schedule. Your thoughts on the way the slate has shaped up for the Canes in 2025?
Well, thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. Happy to be here. Really happy. The only thing I didn't mention is Miami, they played 12 games. 8 of them are at home, and the last 2 are on the road. So of their first 10 games, 8 are at home. That's unheard of. That's bizarre. That's another glitch in the schedule, including, I've never heard of also 3 weeks having 2 byes, in the first couple of months of the season. It's just a bizarre schedule. I guess the ACC said, Miami had Cam Ward last year and couldn't make the playoffs, so we'll just throw together whatever and let them do whatever. It was like, it's almost like they didn't bother to look at what was happening. It's just haphazard. It's like, oh, we'll fit this game in there, this game in there. It's like, how when you try to do a jigsaw puzzle, if all, you do the easiest pieces first, and then you try to find the little, there's like 5 pieces left, and then these go here, here, and here. It's almost like they did everyone else's schedule, and then they're like, okay, now here's where Miami has to play these games, right? Because it makes no sense to have 2 bye weeks in 3 weeks with probably a bad FSU team in between them. You want to put a really good game in there, or maybe a West Coast travel game or something like that in there normally. Of course, there isn't one this year, but that's typically what would happen. I just find it a very strange schedule, but it is a very challenging schedule, which I'm happy about, because I was telling someone the other day, if Miami plays this schedule and finishes 10-2, they're in the playoffs. Part of Miami's problem last year was they were losing to bad teams and beating bad teams. The only team that even finished in the top 25 that they played was Syracuse, which wasn't even a top 25 team at the time they played. So I believe at the time Miami played anybody, I can't remember if there was a single top 25 team they played at that time. Maybe there was one that wound up out of the rankings or something. I can't really remember, but they didn't play Clemson. They didn't play SMU. Their best non-conference game was against the Florida team, which everyone thought was going to win 5 or 6 games, and wound up winning their last 4 to have a decent record. But they started 4-5. So people were like, oh, that win wasn't that big a deal at the time. But this year's schedule, finally, you got Notre Dame, which was in the national title game, as the opener, right? If Miami wins that, instant top 15 team, right? I think they're around 20th in most of the way too early polls. And then if you beat Florida a few weeks later, top 10 probably at that point, and then you're off cruising into an ACC schedule where there's no easy games, but also no super difficult games. I know people say SMU, but to me, SMU still is like SMU, right? I mean, I don't see SMU getting top 10 recruiting classes. Like, I get it. Rhett Lashley has a good offensive scheme, and they honestly thrived on former Miami players. I think 4 of their top 5 losses in the story we put up last night for SMU were former Hurricanes. Jared Harrison Hunt and that other lineman were from Miami, whatever his name was. I don't pay attention once they leave Miami. Those are the top 2 defensive linemen. And then obviously they lost Brashard Smith, who was one of the ACC's top running backs. Keyshawn Smith was one of their top receivers. So now all the Miami players, for the most part, are gone. Although Tyler Van Dyke obviously will be a major impact there. No, that's a joke. But he is there, though. But, I'm not sold on SMU being that great. I think Clemson and Miami will be the class of the ACC in 2025. I predicted, 2 years ago now, a year and a half ago, I actually did say this. I said Miami will win 10 games in 2024, which they did. Of course, I abridged that to 11 or 12 wins as the season went along. But before the season, I'm going to stand with that one. I said 10 wins in 2024. And then I said playoffs in 2025. And I said competing for a national title in 2026. So I'm going to stand by that. Like, that's what I said a year and a half ago. That's the track it should be if Mario Cristobal's a great coach and he's getting paid like he's a great coach. And anything short of that is failure at this point. So honestly, if Miami doesn't make the playoffs this year, that's failure. And they can afford to lose a couple of games. You can lose to Notre Dame or Florida. You can lose 1 ACC game on top of that, in my opinion, and still make the playoffs at 10-2. There's no reason Miami can't do that. I mean, that's not a big ask to beat either Florida or Notre Dame, both home games, and then to just lose 1 ACC game when really the best ACC team you're playing is SMU on the road. And other than that, you got Louisville at home. The other ACC team, Syracuse, has lost a ton. They lost all their offensive guys. Like, the great offense they had is going to be totally revamped. I don't even know who their quarterback's going to be at this point. I don't think they know. NC State is okay. Virginia Tech's average at best. Most people think they were better last year than they're going to be this year, even with Drones back. Pittsburgh, their defense will be good, but their offense is a question mark, and that's also on the road. But, SMU is the big one. Louisville at home, that's probably the next toughest game besides SMU. But it's at home on a night game on a Friday night. It's hard to see Miami losing that if they're a decent team. So really the key is just for Miami to be decent, just be good. And there's no reason they shouldn't be. They finally got the cornerbacks. There's no excuse now at cornerback. I'm hoping Xavier Lucas can actually play safety because they need safety, and you want safeties. And when you watch this film, he looks like he could be a safety. I mean, he really does. He tackles, he runs, physical, tall enough, strong enough to do all the things that you want out of a corner, out of a boundary corner, or a safety. So we'll see, because what they're really missing on defense right now is a safety and then a high-level defensive lineman, depending on if Messidor and Bain are both ends. I think if they can convince Bain to move inside, then grab a great end. And if Bain insists on staying outside, then grab a great tackle. Like, that's it. They're like a couple of players away on defense from being really, really good. No matter how bad Featherman, Heatherman, Detherman, Weatherman, whatever the hell his name is, runs this defense, it's not going to matter, right? Because if you have great players on defense, they will make plays, as long as they're not totally confused. And honestly, his defense is less confusing than Lance Guidry's. So there'll be no reason why they should be confused at all on defense now. So I'm optimistic. Like I said, playoffs. Like, that's my prediction. I'm standing by it. You guys know me. I hate to be positive. I always err on the side of miserable people staying miserable. I'm going playoffs.
All right. So let's unpack some of that. All right. The first thing I'm going to say is not so fast, my friend, on the declaration that Miami can make the playoff with 2 losses, because we have no clue what the ACC is going to look like next year, quite honestly. I mean, we could sit here and hype, be a hype machine in January, 9 months before everybody plays. But we have no idea what the league's going to look like next year. And if Syracuse
schedule, only lose 2 games, you think they don't make the playoffs? Seriously? Like, what planet are you living on? Planet Ferman. I want to be on Planet Ferman right now. It seems very nice there. Great weather.
It would depend on who the losses were to. I mean, obviously,
it doesn't matter because you're beating great teams if you're losing to bad teams. I mean, 2 losses are 2 losses.
Okay, well, I'm going to go through it with you. I'm not convinced there's great teams in the ACC. I'm just not. Like, you already said Syracuse isn't going to be as good. They don't have the quarterback. SMU has lost a lot of talent. They're kind of in rebuilding mode. We don't know.
Hold on.
How good they're going to be. We don't know how good Florida State's going to be. I mean, we could sit here and hype if we want.
So what? So let's say
you're hey, Gary, I want to be a hype machine this morning. But we have no idea how good any of these teams are going to be. NC State, Stanford, Virginia Tech. You just said it's terrible.
What does it matter?
Pitt
it doesn't matter because
together.
Listen to me before you go on and on.
It does matter. I don't think you can lose 2 ACC games and make the playoff.
If you beat Florida and Notre Dame, and then you go, and then you only lose 2 ACC games, you're in. And if you lose to Florida, and if you lose to Florida and lose to Notre Dame and sweep the ACC, you're in my opinion. Like, I don't see how you're not.
What ACC games on this schedule? And I am the first to say it's a tougher schedule than last year. But what 2 games of ACC games do you think Miami can afford to lose and still be considered a playoff team? I don't see it.
If you beat Notre Dame and Florida, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I don't care who you lose to. If you beat SMU and lose to Stanford or vice versa, like, it doesn't matter. If you're going 6-2 in the ACC and you beat Florida and you beat Notre Dame, who will both, in my opinion, be really good teams, like, that's it. That's enough. That's enough.
I don't see it. I don't see it. I'll flat disagree with you. It doesn't really matter because they haven't played 1 game yet, and it's all speculation. But I don't think anybody in the ACC can afford to lose 2 games in the league and make the playoff. I don't know that you can afford to lose 2 games in the league and make the ACC championship game. How about that? But we'll worry about that as the season gets closer, because the truth of the matter is we don't know. We don't even know how good Miami's going to be. We don't know yet, how all these transfers are going to fit in, the new recruits, and we don't know what they're going to do in the spring portal. So we don't even know who's playing for this team yet. It's way too soon to make, any declarations in any direction. I mean, obviously things are trending fairly well. In fact, one of the stories that's on the website is we take a look at the transfer portal additions and we rank them. Obviously, who's number 1. It's Carson Beck, but anyway, so we take a look at those transfer portal additions and how they might fit in, but it's all speculation right now, and there's nothing that we see with our own eyes, and so I would say not so fast on that projection that you can lose 2 games. I don't think that you're thinking about losing 2 games. I think Miami has to figure out what they need to do to seize this next opportunity they have, which is not too dissimilar to the opportunity they had this year when they failed down the stretch because they weren't good enough primarily on defense, but I'd also don't forgive the offense for giving up that. They were certainly part of that big run at Syracuse after they took the lead early in the game, and Syracuse just seized the middle of the game, and that's on both offense and defense, and so is the Georgia Tech game for all practical purposes. So anyway, here's
let me ask you just one more question about this, okay?
Yeah.
Miami was 10-2 against a ridiculous easy schedule last year and came 2 spots really from making the playoffs. So you're saying with a really hard schedule that they won't get the benefit of the doubt and be 2 spots higher than they were last year with this schedule? Like, that's why I can't wrap my head around you saying that.
Lose 2 games in the league, I don't believe they will. And obviously a lot will depend on what the other teams around the country are doing. But I don't believe an ACC team with 2 conference losses. Now, maybe 1 conference loss and a loss to, say, like a Notre Dame, you might survive that. But I don't think an ACC team can really.
So you somehow think that losing to Notre Dame and losing 1 conference game is better than beating Notre Dame and losing 2 conference games when it comes to the playoffs? That's your philosophy.
I don't think
that's crazy.
I don't think the ACC is looked upon with the favor that you could lose 2 games in the conference and make the playoff. Maybe I'll be wrong.
You still need quality wins. Quality wins are the more important than losing. If you lose, you lose. Like, it doesn't. Honestly, I'm trying to think of an example, but there are teams that are really good that lose or almost lose to really bad teams, and like, it's just a loss. If you beat really good teams, that counts more, I believe, in terms of your rankings than losing a game. Like, whether you lose a game to an average ACC team or a bad ACC team, you might drop a couple of extra spots. But if you beat a really good team like a Notre Dame or a Florida, people remember that. That makes an impression on these pollsters because they're not watching every game. They're just looking for your quality wins. And, they lost 2 games, but they beat this team, they beat that team, and they beat this team, who are all ranked. Like, that's important. So, that's how I view it.
All right. So we're going to get into the schedule here in a second, but I'll ask another question. Okay. Is Miami better in 2025 potentially than it was in 2024? And I look at this team and I like to break it down by position, and I ask, is the quarterback position better? Is Carson Beck, coming off of injury, better than Cam Ward? He's going to be pretty damn good to be better than Cam Ward. That's very much in question. Is the running back position better without Damian Martinez? We'll have to see. I mean, Jordan Lyle, some people think Jordan Lyle could be one of the best running backs to ever play at Miami. He's going to get his opportunity in 2025. We'll see what that looks like. But Damian Martinez played some really good football this season. So we'll have to see. The wide receiver position, you're replacing Restrepo. You're replacing Jacoby George. Sam Brown's no longer there. They brought in Daniels, but I think they need more. I think they have to hit the spring portal for a receiver or 2 to fortify that spot. I am not comfortable with what they have there. Now, tight end, obviously, you're replacing Arroyo, but you got some pretty good you got Elijah Lofton elevating now, and you've got a couple really good-looking freshmen. We'll see what they look like in spring practice. So it's not hopeless that position could be as good or better next year. The O-line, you lost Jalen Rivers and Carpenter, and Carpenter you've replaced probably with a better model in TCU center James Brockermeyer. I really believe he will be better than Carpenter. But Jalen Rivers, man, he was a guy that you could really count on the left side of the O-line, and it's going to be very interesting to see if this O-line. And it's going to be very much considered one of the best O-lines in the country going into the season. There's no doubt about it. But it's going to be interesting to see if they can live up to that hype. The D-line, I love the addition of David Blay from Louisiana Tech. But who else is going to be an impact tackle? You're counting on Moten to take it to another level, which we don't know if he can or can't. Depth seems a little bit in question at defensive tackle. I do not believe Ruben Bain has any interest whatsoever in going inside. I think you'll see him stay at end for better or for worse. I believe that he would be a great defensive tackle and probably would be more impactful at defensive tackle than at end. I don't think that's where his heart is. And if your heart is not with playing inside, you're not going to be very good inside. It's maybe the toughest position to play in football if you take away the quarterback, because you're constantly facing double teams. It's a lot of dirty work, and it's not a lot of fun in there. And if your heart's not into it, you're not going to be very good. I think it's been made pretty clear that Ruben Bain's heart is not into being a defensive tackle. So we'll see. Maybe that'll change at some point. So the linebackers, I don't know. I mean, I don't feel comfortable that they've significantly upgraded at linebacker. They've definitely clearly upgraded in the secondary, and that should help a lot. But I think there's still work to do. I think there's work to do in the spring portal, and I think this spring practice coming up in March and April is going to be highly critical from a player development standpoint. And yes, Miami does need to start doing a better job of its player development, because, and Matt's going to love this, you can't just go in the transfer portal all the time to get everything you need. And it seems like the toy that's still over here on the side, but ultimately you got to, these young recruiting classes that Mario Cristobal has put together, these guys have got to start stepping up and performing and living up to the hype that was anticipated when they were recruited. So I'm not ready like you are, Matt, to make all kinds of declarations about playoffs and championships and being able to slide into the back door of a playoff with 2 losses and stuff like that. I'm not ready to go into any of those places yet. I see this as a step-by-step process. Spring practice, keep getting better, develop your young talent, get Carson Beck healthy. Spring portal, add some pieces, D-tackle, receiver, make the team even better, and then go to work in the summer and see where you're at. Opening day against the Notre Dame team, and we might as well start there, Matt, as we segue back into the schedule. A Notre Dame team that everybody is projecting to be in the top 10 again next year. They've taken some big transfer portal losses. I think they've lost 3 starting offensive linemen at Notre Dame, which is a big deal. But they have a good roster, and they'll also fill in with pieces out of the portal, and that figures to be one of the best games of opening weekend. So, Matt, I love opening with a game like this. I think it keeps your team's attention through the whole off season, keeps everybody working hard. Your thoughts on the season opener against Notre Dame?
Yeah, I mean, you're listening to you. It's like listening to Mario Cristobal. One game at a time. I can't look ahead. The tomorrow's the next.
You don't even know who's going to be on the team.
I think I know who's on the team. I feel fairly secure that I know 85 players that are on the team, but apparently that's, according to you, fake news. There was nobody on the team, according to you, I guess. I don't know how they're going to practice this spring. But yeah, look, Notre Dame, the weird thing with all these opponents, and we, this morning, well, last night on this morning, now we have it, but we sort of look at some of these other teams, but there's no guarantees that these teams will have the players we're even mentioning, or that any of these players will be starting or be good, or, the portal changes everything. So in that sense, Gary's right. Teams may look different, but I'm going to assume that the players Miami has that are starting caliber players will still be here, which is why I feel pretty good about their team next year. And Notre Dame loses a lot. They lose a lot.
Which, by the way, players can leave in the spring portal too.
Correct.
I mean, we hope they don't.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
In some cases, a couple might be asked to, but you hope that doesn't happen, that your roster does not get raided.
It's nice that you don't listen to me, because I literally just said that. But, Notre Dame has its top 2 running backs returning. Even with some offensive line losses, it's supposed to be a great offensive line. The big question for them is going to be their quarterback, with Riley Leonard gone. They got a couple of guys, Steve Angeli and CJ Carr, I guess, who they're looking at right now as the main guys. Top receivers back. On defense, they lost, I think, 7 starters. So, they got some guys back. But again, the great programs reload, and then you fill in the pieces with the portal, and they've already added a bunch of portal guys, which we mentioned in the story as well. A couple of receivers, and there's already 4 guys on defense that are expected to make fairly big impacts that we mentioned in our story. So yeah, to me, Notre Dame is the toughest game of the year, and it's also the first game. So there was somebody on the message board asking what's the most important game of the year, and most people were saying Notre Dame, some were saying Florida. To me, it's no brainer Notre Dame. Like, I understand everyone wants to beat Florida. You want to beat Florida, you want to beat Florida State every year. But that's when you want to be the champions of the state of Florida. Like, I'm past that. I don't need to be the champion of the state of Florida anymore. I'm done with that. Like, let's get back to winning national championships, right? And to do that, everyone's going to remember that first game against Notre Dame. You lose that first game to Notre Dame, and like Gary said, you lose one more game along the way. According to Gary, maybe you don't make the playoffs. And the chances are, if you lose to Notre Dame, you're probably going to falter at some point down the road because you're not probably at the level you should be, right? So to me, you got to beat Notre Dame, and then you're off running. You're guaranteed 3-0 start. Then you're playing Florida at home. You win that, and I don't care if you lose 2 more games. I think at that point, if you beat Notre Dame and Florida, beat a top independent program and a good SEC team, like, I don't care if you lose 2 ACC games. People will remember that, and you'll be in good shape. And then the big question is, I don't know. I saw the ACCs thinking about maybe giving the first place team a bye and having the second and third team play, because what conferences are realizing is playing in the conference title game is a punishment. Because if you have 2 losses, 1 non-conference loss and 1 conference loss, and you finish at the top of the ACC standings, and you were forced to play an ACC title game against another really good ACC team, and you lose that as your 3rd loss of the year, you're out of the playoffs. Whereas if your season just ended with 2 losses, as I've been saying, against a really good schedule.
If you give the first place team a bye, that's not a title game anymore. So what are you going to call it? The ACC elimination game? What's the point?
To me, the solution is simple. Get rid of the conference title game and make an extra playoff weekend.
How do you make up that money if you're the conference?
I don't care.
They make a lot of money on those titles.
I don't care. The extra playoff game will give plenty of money to plenty of people. Believe me, that will have more interest than seeing 2 crappy ACC teams.
So maybe go to 16 teams instead of 12 and get rid of the title games. That wouldn't be a bad idea.
That's what I just said. Yeah. That's what I would do. I mean, it's a no-brainer. I would opt out of the conference title game. If I'm Miami and I have 2 losses and they say, hey, Miami, you're playing Clemson in the ACC title game. Good luck. I'm opting out. I'm going to opt out. Let Clemson play, Duke. We're going to opt out and just go to the playoffs. Like, I literally would do that, because guess what? If you opt out of the ACC title game, you're in the playoffs. I hope Miami's in that situation and that Mark Criswell says we're going to opt out. F you, ACC, because they should say F you to the ACC at this point. I mean, they've never done Miami a single favor, ever.
Yeah, he probably wouldn't have a problem doing that. I can see
it. He'll never do that, but I would love it. I would, like, we're not playing in the ACC title game. It doesn't matter. We're a national championship program. We're not an ACC championship program. We don't care about the ACC. I would freaking love it.
All right, so after Notre Dame, we got the scrimmage against Bethune-Cookman, and followed by another home game against USF. Now, listen, maybe I'm crazy, maybe I'm a masochist, but I wish, like, USF and those kind of games, I'd even accept Ball State, were the baseline for Miami scheduling. Like I don't see what playing FAMU and Bethune does anymore for the Miami Hurricanes and the fans and the home schedule, and obviously the home schedule this year is plenty good, but I don't know. I'm not going to get off on that tangent, but we'll skip right to South Florida, Matt, and I do think that'll be a good week for Miami because of the way that the schedule has come together. And when you look at those bye weeks that are coming up, I mean, you don't want to be 6 weeks into the season and going to play at Florida State and have only played two real games. So I like that USF game. It's kind of like a developmental week where hopefully you take care of business and you can develop the middle of the roster that you're going to probably need at Florida State. And you're going to need maybe against Florida and against that juggernaut of an ACC schedule that you've already been talking about. So I kind of like the quality of the USF game.
Well, then you're going to be disappointed because, they made a bowl game last year, even though Miami crushed them. But after the season ended, a lot of their better players transferred out. Like, they see the writing on the wall. Like, that program is not real good. And what you see happen is when you have, and this is true for everybody.
It's better than playing Bethune.
If you're a program that doesn't have a ton of NIL money and you have good players, they're going to find a program that will give them some NIL money. And you saw a lot of USF guys leave after the season. So, it's the haves and the have-nots. We're lucky Miami's one of the haves. But when you're playing the have-nots, they just don't have a chance, So I think USF will be worse this year than they were last year, and I think it'll be an easy win.
All right. So then you got bye week number 1. No, I'm sorry. I'm skipping ahead.
Next week, Florida game doesn't matter. Who cares about Florida? Nobody cares.
Yeah, the next week it's Florida, and it's interesting because you got Florida bye week, Florida State. Kind of in a weird sequence there. But I think Florida will obviously be better than they were when Miami played them up there last year. DJ Lagway is now a little bit more of a seasoned quarterback. But Matt, I'm going to be controversial here. I'm going to say I think he's overhyped. I don't think he is as dynamic and great as they want to make him out to be up in Gainesville. But obviously, this will not be an easy win for Miami. Your thoughts on Florida Gators 2025 edition that'll come to Hard Rock Stadium?
Look, this is a very different Florida team than the one Miami faced last year. And I am buying the Lagway hype. I think he's an outstanding young quarterback. Did he have a great year last year? No. But he got better as the year went on. Notwithstanding a bowl. I mean, you can see in the bowl game he made some great plays and also some dumb ones, but that's like what a freshman does, and he's going to learn from that. So I think, I know we have Notre Dame as the toughest game in Florida as the second toughest. I honestly think they're both pretty much equally tough. It's weird to say that Florida's as good as Notre Dame because most people will be like, that's crazy. But I spent 5 days living with a Florida fan. I went skiing in Telluride last week, and I mean, you hear him talk about Florida, and he's followed Florida forever. He literally, you can't even talk to him during a Florida basketball game, a Florida baseball game, a Florida football game. Forget about it. And so I sort of asked him, what he thinks about this team versus the past teams, because he's not a homer fan. I mean, he's a diehard fan, but he's not a homer fan in the sense that they're always the best team. They're always, he's like, look, we sucked at the start of last year and and then they got a little better, and there's still some question marks here, question mark there. But he recognizes that this is a team on the rise. And I know Miami fans don't care about Florida. Who cares, right? But Florida is a team that got so much better as last season progressed and returned so many starters to that team, to this coming year. Whereas you could argue Miami got worse as last year went on and lost all their starters, right, especially on offense. That this is a game that you just say on paper, why would Miami win this game, right, on paper? Now, Miami's going to win this game, or if they win this game, as a Miami fan, you, of course, want them to win. But if Miami does win, it's going to be with the transfer portal, right? Because what Florida is doing right now is they're developing their players and keeping their players, right? What Miami's doing right now is they had half their starters last year were transfers who are all gone, okay? And now they're bringing in more transfer starters. There's probably going to be about half the team will be transfer starters again next year. And as Florida State will tell you, you can live by the portal and die by the portal. I think Miami will live by the portal this coming year. I've already said it. I predicted playoffs, right? But it's going to be really interesting dichotomy. As we preview that game, it'll be clear to all of you out there that these Florida guys that are playing, they played together last year, most of them. They were on the team together last year. They have built that locker room chemistry together over more than 6 months that the Miami players will have built their locker room with all these new players coming in, all these new personalities coming in. So it's going to be really interesting to see because it's still a relatively early game, right? Fourth game of the season. The teams are still gelling. They're still figuring things out to some extent at that point, right? And I could see, again, like Notre Dame, I would say 50-50. I would say Florida 50-50. Like, these are going to be really difficult games. And my guess is when August rolls around and we talk privately to coaches, it would not surprise me to hear them say that they think Florida is actually a tougher team to face than Notre Dame, because Notre Dame has a new defense coordinator. They have a bunch of new players coming in that are portal guys, right? They have to mesh together just like Miami will. Whereas Florida has a lot of these guys that are back on their offensive line, a quarterback, running back. I mean, you go down the list, they're top defensive linemen. They lost one of their top defensive linemen, but they have one of them back that's really good. Linebacker, DBs, a lot of DBs are back. So it would not surprise me if when August rolls around, Miami coaches are saying Florida's their toughest game.
You're out of your mind. Okay. You got the Florida Gators at home, first month of the season. You got to win that game.
I'm not saying they're not going to. I didn't say they're not going to win. I said it's an interesting dichotomy of a team that's keeping and developing from a year ago versus a Miami team that's going to have half the new starters. You know, that are transfer guys.
Notre Dame, you have at home too. They're acknowledged as one of the top teams in the country. Probably going to be a pick-em type of game. No argument. You got to beat the Florida Gators.
By the way, Florida's number 9 in the on-3 way too early rankings. So other people see it too, Gary. I know you don't want to see it, but I'm telling you, Florida's going to be really good. I know you don't want to hear it.
They improved a lot after playing Miami.
And they have a lot of their guys back.
Yeah.
They were playing really well at the end of the year with these same guys.
We'll see. I think they're being overvalued. I think Lagway's being overvalued, and I think Miami's got to win the game. But we're a long way from that. From that too. All right. So after Florida, you got that bye week, which is good. I mean, that's a good time for a bye week. No problem there. I'm not crazy about the one after this next game, but then you play Florida State, and Florida State's going to be better than they've been. Yet you're going to have already played Notre Dame in Florida, which is a positive because you're going to have had good competition to get ready for Florida State. But the downside of it is that there's the possibility of taking Florida State for granted, and you're going on the road to Doak Campbell. And I wouldn't be shocked if Miami ends up in a tough game there. I would think the Florida State will be a better team this year than it's been. They've done a lot of work in the portal. We'll see how things go for them too. But I'm a little concerned about that trip to Doak Campbell. You always got to respect the road games for sure, no matter who you're playing. But I think that it's not going to be perceived as big of a game, as big as the rivalry is, as Florida and Notre Dame were. And now you're going on the road for the first time of the season. Matt, I don't know why. I just got a weird feeling about that game that it's going to end up being a little tougher than people think.
Well, again, it's the whole portal thing. So for instance, we're talking about Florida a minute ago, right? How they have all these returning guys. So Florida has taken 5 portal guys. One's a punter, right? So really 4 regular players in the portal. Miami's taken 11 so far, probably taken 3 or 4, maybe even 5 more, right? Florida State's already taken 16, okay? This is what Florida State does now. They take 20 to 25 guys in the portal. Like, that's their team. Their team, they are portal university. And so you don't know what you're going to get. 2 years ago, when they had Jordan Travis and a bunch of portal guys that hit really, really well, they went undefeated in the regular season, right? Last year, they took a ton of portal guys, and they were terrible. It never meshed. They were all personalities. They had no quarterback. They're huge miss at quarterback in the portal. This year they got Castellanos from BC at quarterback, who I think is pretty good. He's pretty good. But the question is, how do these other portal guys show out? Are they going to be better than they were last year? It's going to be a whole new team. So, like, for us to sit here and say they're going to be better, well, yeah, they should be better when they get more inches of snow than they had wins last week. Like, yeah, it's hard to say they're going to be worse. I mean, if they get 1 inch of snow next year, will that be more snow than they had wins? I doubt it. But this is probably on paper a 5 or 6 win Florida State team. And yeah, I know it's the big game. It's on the road. Like, if Miami's any good, this is an easy win. Like, if Miami's not any good, then this will be a dogfight. And I am of the opinion that Miami, you mentioned the position by position thing, which, by the way, I brought up like 2 weeks ago, and we did a whole show about it, right? And the bottom line, I'm not going to go through every position all over again, but the bottom line is on offense, every position has gotten on paper worse, which is fine because they were the number 1 offense, right? You lose your top running back, you lose your quarterback, who's the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. You lose every receiver, you lose your starting tight end, who's an NFL guy, right? You lose one of your top 2 offensive linemen in Jalen Rivers. You lose your center, who maybe the guy coming in is better. I think he is better, but at best, that's a push.
Did they already go through all this?
At best, they're a push in the offensive line. And then on defense, the defensive line, you had the same guys, and you lose Simeon Barrow, who's your best, most consistent lineman. At linebacker, you lose your top linebacker, and the secondary is the only position that's better, right? So on paper right now, the secondary is the only position that's better, and you don't even have a second safety right now, right? Unless you think Zaquan Patterson can answer the bell, which I think he can, but it's to be determined, right? So now you sit there and you say, well, how good is this team? If last year's team, only one position is definitely better right now, and last year's team didn't make the playoffs, why would we be better this year against a tougher schedule? It makes no sense.
The exact reason I'm not making predictions.
But the reason is because the offense was #1 in the country, and it certainly can still be top 20 with Carson Beck easily. They still need a slot receiver, in my opinion, but other than that, the offense will be fine. And the defense is the answer. The defense was allowing over 30 points a game just in the ACC portion of the schedule, right? The defense lost every game they lost, not the offense, okay? So as long as the defense takes a step up, they'll be fine. And the defensive line, yeah, they lost Simeon Barrow, but they still got back the talented guys who underperformed last year that we know are good enough. You know, at linebacker, you got Wesley DeSaints back as a returning starter. You need a young guy, a Raul Aguirre, or bring in a portal guy, or you do have Jalen Alderman back, who, guess what, started at Louisville 2 years ago, who's fine, okay? And now the secondary got finally addressed in the portal, which before last year I said this is going to be a big problem for those people that watched the show every day. I said Lance Guidry's defense only functions well when you have really, really good corners, and that's the weakest area of the entire team. And that honestly turned out to be his downfall. Now they've hugely addressed cornerback to where it's one of maybe the best units, if not the best unit in the ACC. There's actually a couple other teams that have really good secondary, so I won't say that. But one of the top cornerback groups in the ACC, I believe, they have now. So that huge jump at cornerback, which really cost Miami on defense over and over and over again, that was the position group that just killed them, was cornerback and safety. The fact they addressed one of those in such a big way and can address the other one still, they can get rid of all the what's going on, coach, before the snap, right? All the hands raised, right? Because it should be a simpler defense to understand in a similar 4-2-5 scheme. Like, that is why I think they're going to be really, really good this year. So you know, when you look at Florida State and all their question marks, and you can look at Miami and say, well, Miami's only better at one position. Like, that's why Miami's going to beat Florida State. That's why Miami can compete with Florida and Notre Dame, even though those are two top 10 teams in the way too early polls, depending which ones you look at. That's why Miami can lose only 1 or 2 games potentially, play a really good schedule. And while Gary says that they can only lose 1 game all year to make the playoffs, that's why I think they can make the playoffs
One
with 2
conference
losses,
game
and will make the playoffs with 2 losses.
All right, so after the Florida State game, you have a bye, and then you begin a 7-week stretch through this juggernaut ACC that Matt Shodell is trying to convince us exists, that everybody around the country is going to respect. And I'm not convinced.
I never said that. What are you talking about?
You got Louisville, and we don't know how good they're going to be this year. They figure to put a decent team together, though, no argument. But you get them at home on a Friday night.
Can I just interject, since you're already making stuff up? The only 2 good ACC teams that Miami's going to play are SMU and Louisville. That's it. The other ones all have huge question marks. Pitt's defense is okay.
Exactly my point. So we say the schedule's tougher this year, and it is. No matter how you slice it and dice it up,
only because last year's was so easy. Last year's schedule was so easy.
But people around the country aren't going to be waving their orange and green colored pom-poms over this juggernaut of a Miami schedule because of the overall average nature that still exists within the ACC. And, you know, I would argue, you know, last year when an SMU stepped up, when a Louisville stepped up, that, you know, maybe last year it might have been a little bit better than how it looks like it's going to be this year. But a long way to go. Spring practices, spring transfer portal. We don't know what those teams are going to look like either. But as we sit here today, I am not sitting here shaking in my shoes over Louisville, Stanford, SMU, Syracuse, NC State. Okay. Right now, I will go out on the limb and I will say win, and it better play out that way, or else we're going to be talking about disasters in the month of November. But I will say this: when you get to November 22nd and you go at Virginia Tech, and then you come home, and then you got to get on a plane the day after Thanksgiving and go to Pitt, which would likely be very cold. To me, like, that is a problematic area where Miami's going to really obviously have to be on its game. Matt, I don't understand why the ACC does this every time Miami goes to Pitt. They love to set that game for Thanksgiving weekend, the last game of the year. I mean, it's supposed to be rivalry weekend or whatever. Miami-Pitt is not a rivalry, okay? Why, in your mind, does the ACC make Miami go play that cold weather game at the end of the year at Pittsburgh?
Rack your brain. I already told you why. The jigsaw puzzle was done, and they had a few pieces left. I'm like, oh, let's, you know, Miami goes there, Miami goes here. Like, the ACC is a North Carolina-based
I think the last 3 Pitt games have been the last game of the year, if I'm not mistaken, late in November at Pittsburgh when they've played at Pittsburgh.
The ACC is a North Carolina-driven organization that doesn't care about Miami or Miami's rivalry weekend or anything else, honestly. I mean, they're getting their TV money whether Miami plays Florida State in the first week of the season or the last week of the season, and yeah, TV can dictate a little bit, but whatever. Like, if you're going to play Florida State October 4th, what's the other rivalry game you're going to put in the last weekend, Gary? There is no other ACC team. Virginia Tech's not a rivalry game at this point. Syracuse isn't either. I know they're both in the Big East. Like SMU, they just joined the ACC. So what game? So you want FSU as the last game of the year? FSU sucks. Like, there's no other options. Who are you going to put there? What do they care? The ACC doesn't care, and there's no one to put there. Clemson would have been great, but I'm happy not playing Clemson. I don't need to play Clemson. But yeah, if they were playing Clemson this year, that would have made sense to make that the last game of the year. But then again, if you're the ACC and you make Miami Clemson the last game of the year, and those are maybe your 2 best ACC teams, you're maybe knocking one of them out of the playoffs at that point. So, if I'm the ACC and I want as many playoff teams as possible, I'm taking my 3 or 4 best perceived ACC teams and making the last 3 or 4 games as easy as possible for all of them. Because if you lose, like we saw last year, 2 of your last 3 ACC games, they will punish you. The playoff committee will punish you.
All right, so there's your schedule as a complete body, and again, it's tougher than this year. I don't think it's insurmountable. Right now, Miami's big challenge is just get good enough to handle the schedule, and they can do it. Like, they've reinforced the team through the portal. They got to integrate those guys. They got to integrate a decent freshman class, and then see what their needs are coming out of spring practice, and then go find them in the spring portal. And get Carson Beck healthy, and we're going to be really excited in August. So, Matt, I mentioned earlier in the show the story on our website where we had you go into the lab. Everybody loves when you go in the lab because you can't annoy anybody in the lab. You're there all alone, just you and your brain. And by the way, I was reading Elon Musk is bringing some type of brain chip transplant brain laboratory to Miami as part of his new role in the country. And anytime you don't feel like your brain is operating properly, you'll be able to go over there and get a chip of some type put in your brain that might alter it. Now, I think it's mostly for people that are paralyzed. They're trying to help people regenerate their brains, but anyway, we sent you into the lab and had you rank the portal additions, and no surprise, Carson Beck number 1. No surprise, Center James Brockmeyer number 2. No surprise, David Blay number 3. But as you went through this exercise and made it all the way to number 13, blocking tight end Jack Nickel, Luke's brother, your just general feeling having gone through that exercise, do you feel better about the portal haul? Do you not like it? What are your thoughts on Miami's early portal class of 2025?
Well, first of all, you mentioned the Elon Musk brain thing, and they actually, this is interesting, they reanimated a pig brain. They actually were able to inject it and bring it back to life after it was dead for 20 minutes. And hold on, let me read a quote here from the story. Quote, after the reanimation, the pig's IQ was higher than Gary Ferman's, which is a remarkable achievement. Even though the IQ was apparently still very low, that's still a remarkable achievement. Now, in terms of the transfer portal, I thought last year, I said it at the time, I thought last year's haul was their best under Mario Cristobal. They had wasted way too many spots under an 85 limit with his recruiting prowess the first 3 cycles he had. But I thought, I said before last year, I said, listen, finally, free agent, just a couple of guys who were like whatevers. And now, look, there's no limit this year. Miami will be in part of a conference that is allowing 105 to be the limit. So really the only limit now is money. But in terms of the pickups, there are guys that are just like, just guys that you sort of need, right? I mean, you mentioned Luke, Luke Nickel's brother. His last name was Quarter instead of Nickel. He's probably not here. They took a long snapper. They took a kickoff specialist. Those guys are needed. They're needed. I'm fine with that, right? You're not paying a fortune for them. You have no limit. Like, that's fine now, right? The only guys that, to me, they're probably not going to play. They're more they're probably more developmental types, would probably be like Carnley to me. And I'm still not 100% sold on Poyser. I know a lot of people like Poyser's film, but you know, I mean, he gave up 310 yards and 3 touchdowns in coverage, and like he was playing at Jacksonville State. So I know fans are going to be mad because they think Poyser's going to be great, and they need him to be great, right? He's going to be a starting safety, but I'm not sold on him. And then of course the cornerbacks are great. You know, Alex Bauman is a tight end. He's not a great blocker, and I know they're bringing him in to be more of a blocker, but he's a great red zone target, so I like him more for that. I think Xavier Lucas starts somewhere, whether boundary corner or at safety. I think Charles Brantley, if he's healthy, has to start at either corner or nickel. You know, CJ Daniels, we have him pretty high on the list. Personally, I'm not 100% sold on him just because, you know, I'm one of those guys where I always say it, right? I want to see them do it at a high-level program. Not that they can't be great from a lower-level program. That happens all the time. Well, not all the time, but sometimes. But what happened with CJ Daniels is he was great at whatever pro was it, Liberty, wherever the hell he was. And then he goes to LSU, and he was not good. He was like their 5th receiver, didn't do much there. So what we've seen from him so far is at the one high-level program that he went to, they saw him in practice, they put him in a certain role, and he was not very successful. So now will that be different at Miami? I don't know, but I'm not going to sit here and say he's a free agent right now until he proves it, okay, just because of that, right? I'm not going to say a guy who is very, very average at a major program is going to all of a sudden be a free agent here, even if he was good at Liberty 2 years ago. Was it Liberty, by the way, Gary? Do you remember? I think it was Liberty. But anyway, David Blay I like a lot. I know he's a lower-level program, Louisiana Tech, but he's just so quick and explosive off film. Like, he's one of those guys that I really think, even though he doesn't fit my traditional definition of free agent, I think he actually is, because I've seen a lot of film, and I don't watch highlight film. I hate highlight film. I watch game film. And the game film that I've seen him play, yeah, I know you love highlights, Gary. I look at the highlight film.
I mean, I get what you're saying about highlight film, but you're so full of crap. You don't watch game film.
There is no highlight film of David Blay. What else? What are you going to watch? Try to find a highlight film of David Blay. You got to watch the actual games. Good luck with that. I literally put clips together of David Blay from the games that I watched. Like, that's the film analysis.
You watched the entire games, the whole game.
I didn't have a choice. I only watched when they were on defense. But yeah, the games that they had online, I watched those. Of course, I watched those games. I looked at the box score to see where he had tackles, and I specifically went to some of those plays so I can grab him and see what he did in them. Of course, yeah. What else am I going to do? What do you think I do when I go in the lab? I just sit there and watch a 5-minute highlight and take all his best plays? Have you not noticed I put bad plays in the highlights too? Do you think those bad plays show up in the highlight film? I'm like,
this is why people and I want you on this show, because you're thorough.
Listen, David Blay, I think from watching his film will translate just fine to this level. Not as a great run stopper, but specifically making plays in the defensive backfield, in the offensive backfield. James Brockermeyer is good, not great, but he's certainly as much as good as Zach Carpenter was coming in from TCU. And then Carson Beck's film, you know, we've gone over it ad nauseum. I mean, he makes some of the dumbest Tyler Van Dyke throws you can make, which God forbid I say it out loud, but I put them on film for you people to see because I went through his actual games, unlike Gary Ferman, who, you know, Gary, if Gary played a 7-on-7 game against Oakdale Middle School, he'd put his touchdown highlights on film and try to get a scholarship, okay? Unlike that, I look at the real film, the actual games, and I note the interceptions. I watched every single interception that Carson Beck threw, okay, last year. I watched every single one of them, and about half of them were idiotic. You know, some of them were the receiver's faults. Some of them was hard to tell if it was a bad route or a bad throw, but some of them were just flat out awful. And then he made some amazing throws. So, like, he has plenty of arm talent. He has good enough plus accuracy. His escapability, people say it's a little bit underrated. I don't, you know, I know he runs a little bit. He's a very long-gated, not fast guy. So, yeah, if you give him room, he'll be able to run, but he's not a running quarterback at all. He's not Cam Ward. He's not going to slow down on the sidelines and wait for somebody to shove him out of bounds. You know, he's going to scamper out of bounds at a really slow speed. But he's good enough. Like, he's way better than if we took him last year, he wouldn't have thrown, you know, what was it? However many touchdowns Cam Ward threw, he wouldn't have thrown that many, but he probably would have hit 30. He probably would have 30 touchdowns with that same group. If you put Carson Beck on last year's team, he probably saw 30 touchdowns in the regular season, in 12 games. You know, you can put me down for that. And I think he would average 280 plus yards passing per game. Like, he's very, very, very good. Is he Cam Ward good? No, but like, nobody is. You know, nobody at Miami has been Cam Ward good.
Talking
with his
likely
running, his
number one
passing, his
pick.
excitability, being the top draft pick probably in the draft, all that stuff. Certainly in a very long time in terms of the draft pick. And it's going to be a different look with Carson Beck for sure. But there's no reason he can't throw, 28 plus touchdowns, average 275 plus passing yards if they get another really good slot receiver, they have a good enough offensive line. And his grades, by the way, when you look at Pro Football Focus for Beck, really, really bad when he's pressured. I think 35%, it's not expected to be good when you're pressured, but it should be in the 50s for a really good quarterback. He was in the 30s. But when he's not pressured, he's elite, 90 plus percent grade, hitting deep bombs, like on target. So that's really the key, right? As long as Miami's offensive line's good enough, holds up, they give him max protection when they need to, and they figure stuff out, and and he understands the offense, he'll be plenty good enough. That's all you need. And then the defense is improved like we think it should be. That's what you need. A top 20 offense, a top 30 defense, and bam, 2 losses in the playoffs, Ferman. Book it.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for today's Good Morning CaneSport. I think you guys have put up with enough of Matt here. But we obviously thank you so much for starting out your day with us. And if you're on YouTube right now, please hit your subscribe and like buttons. It does help us grow our audience on YouTube. And if you're not yet a subscriber to CaneSport.com, this is more important than anything. We really, really need you to come on board. Your subscriptions allow our entire operation to work every single day. And we have a great fan community. You will not be sorry. So come on over to CaneSport.com and get yourself a subscription today. So for Matt Shodell, I'm Gary Ferman. Thank you again for joining us, everybody. And we will see you next time.